Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Ukraine is turning Russia's fuel system into a strategic vulnerability. This is no longer just about one refinery here or one depot there. Kyiv is building pressure on the machinery that keeps Russia's war moving, keeps Crimea supplied, and lets the Kremlin pretend everything is fine at home. Spoiler alert. When fuel lines start forming and officials start rationing gasoline, the everything is normal routine gets a little harder to sell. The center of gravity today is occupied Crimea. Ukrainian strikes around the Kerch Strait have pushed Russian-installed authorities into public crisis management. Sergei Aksyonov, the Kremlin-appointed head of Crimea, suspended fuel sales to private citizens and businesses, limiting supplies to government agencies. In Sevastopol, Mikhail Razvozhaev rolled out conservation measures, shortened public transport and retail hours, suspended ferry activity, canceled outdoor events, and urged people to use less electricity. That is not just logistics. That is occupation governance under stress. The strategic picture is pretty clear. Russia has two main ways to sustain Crimea: the Kerch Strait connection back to Russia and the overland route through occupied southern Ukraine. Ukraine is squeezing both. Around Kerch, Kyiv targeted oil infrastructure, ferry logistics, radar systems, and air defense assets. On the land bridge, Ukrainian forces have also been striking rail bridges, trucks, fuel vehicles, and logistics points across occupied Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. The message is simple: Crimea is not a safe rear area, and Moscow's supply network is more fragile than it looks on Russian television. This matters because Crimea is more than a symbol for Putin. It is a military platform, a logistics hub, a political trophy, and a giant piece of Kremlin mythology wrapped in a vacation brochure. Russia annexed it in 2014 and has spent years treating it as untouchable. Ukraine is now challenging that assumption every week. The point is not just to blow things up. The point is to raise the operating cost of the occupation, strain Russian choices, and force Moscow to defend more places with fewer easy answers. Now widen the lens. Ukraine is also taking the war deeper into Russia's own fuel economy. Zelensky confirmed that Ukrainian drones hit the Tyumen refinery in western Siberia, more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine. He also said Ukraine has deployed drones that can reach 3,000 kilometers. That is a big number. But the bigger story is psychological and economic. Moscow can no longer assume distance equals safety. That is an uncomfortable plot twist for the Kremlin, like finding out the quiet character in episode 1 was actually the whole show. Russia's refinery problem is becoming harder to wave away. Outside analysts cited in the reporting estimate that recent Ukrainian attacks have knocked more than 20% of Russian refining capacity offline. Fuel restrictions have reportedly appeared across dozens of regions in Russia and occupied Ukraine. Moscow's own refinery has been hit repeatedly, and that facility reportedly supplies a major share of fuel for the capital region. The Kremlin has spent 4 years trying to shield ordinary Russians from the cost of the war. Ukraine is now poking holes in that insulation. There is a sanctions angle here, too. Ukraine calls these strikes long-range sanctions, and that phrase is doing some work. Western sanctions aim to restrict Russia's ability to fund and sustain the war. Ukrainian drones are creating physical enforcement pressure on the same system. Oil money, refining capacity, fuel availability, military logistics, and public confidence all touch the same nerve. Russia is still a major energy power, obviously. But even big energy powers have bottlenecks, specialized equipment, and repair problems. Kyiv is hunting those bottlenecks. Russia, for its part, is responding with more pressure on Ukrainian cities, ports, and civilians. Overnight attacks hit areas including Sumy, Zaporizhzhia, Odessa, Kharkiv, Kyiv, and Izmail. Ukrainian officials reported civilian deaths, including a 13-year-old boy, his father, and an elderly woman in Sumy region. Russian strikes also hit postal infrastructure and civilian sites. That is Moscow's grim playbook. When strategic pressure builds, punish the population and call it warfare. It is as ugly as it is familiar. The Black Sea is also back in the danger zone. Ukrainian officials said Russian drones struck the Panamanian-flagged Turkish cargo vessel Victress while it was headed toward Ukraine. A 58-year-old Egyptian cook was killed, and crew members from Turkey and India had to evacuate by lifeboat. Other vessels under Palau and Belize flags also reportedly came under attack. This is not a side note. It affects shipping risk, insurance, export routes, food security, and how much danger foreign crews face when operating near Ukraine. Diplomatically, Kyiv is making sure it is not treated like background scenery in talks about its own future. Zelensky said Ukraine will decide who represents Europe in any negotiations with Russia. That line is sharp because European leaders are discussing possible formats for engagement with Moscow, while US-backed talks have stalled. Ukraine's position is basically, allies can propose, but Kyiv chooses. Fair enough. The country being invaded gets a vote at the table. Wild concept, apparently still worth repeating in 2026. The air defense industrial piece may be just as important. Zelensky said the U.S. responded positively for the first time to Ukraine's request for licenses to produce U.S.-designed Patriot interceptor missiles locally. He also said Trump plans to ask U.S. defense companies to establish licensed production in Europe and Ukraine. This is a major shift if it happens. Ukraine needs interceptors against Russian ballistic missiles, and global demand is tight, especially with the Iran war exposing shortages. Donations are helpful. Production capacity is strategic. That is where the long war is headed. Europe's support picture, though, has a nasty political wrinkle with Poland. Polish President Karol Nawrocki revoked Zelensky's Order of the White Eagle after Ukraine renamed a military unit after the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, a group tied in Polish memory to massacres in Volhynia and eastern Galicia during World War II. Ukrainian former presidents and officials returned Polish awards in response. Prime Minister Donald Tusk tried to cool things down, calling the dispute a strategic mistake. He is right to worry. Russia does not need to invent every crack in the Western coalition. Sometimes history leaves one sitting right there, and Moscow just waits with popcorn. Belarus is another pressure point. Zelensky again urged Minsk to dismantle relay equipment he says helps Russian drone strikes into Ukraine. He pointed to 4 systems in Gomel and Brest oblasts and warned Belarus had limited time to act. He also said Belarusian gasoline supplies to Russia rose 13-fold from January through May compared with the same period last year, while diesel supplies tripled. That means Belarus is not just a passive neighbor watching the show. It is part of Russia's adaptation network. The Kremlin called Ukraine's warning an encroachment on Belarusian sovereignty, which is rich coming from Moscow, the world heavyweight champion of sovereignty for me, not for thee. On the battlefield, the key place to watch is Kostiantynivka in Donbas. Ukrainian commanders say the situation remains under control, but reports from the city are tense. Russian troops have infiltrated parts of it, and one Ukrainian commander acknowledged about 130 Russian soldiers remain inside. The reason this matters is strategic. If Kostiantynivka falls, Russia gains a better route toward Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, Ukraine's major remaining Donbas strongholds. This is not a lightning breakthrough. It is slow, urban, exhausting pressure. The intelligence and domestic security layer is busy too. Ukraine's SBU and National Police said they detained 2 alleged FSB agents preparing an incendiary attack near an administrative building in central Kyiv. The alleged plan involved a generator, a hidden phone camera, a second device to destroy evidence, and an escape route through Belarus using an inflatable boat. Russia's FSB separately claimed it detained a Russian citizen in Voronezh accused of working with Ukrainian intelligence. And in a very modern little chaos grenade, a Telegram channel linked to Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin was reportedly hacked and filled with "Moscow will burn" posts and links to a Ukrainian drone fundraiser. Thanks for listening and for being part of this community. If you want to support the show, leaving a review or a thoughtful comment helps others discover it. We also share a daily written intel brief on Substack, restrictedhandling.substack.com, where we go deeper on Russia and China, along with broader coverage of Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Wishing you a great week ahead.